Just a moment for the live to begin.
I'll wait for that. Well, welcome everybody to our meeting this Sabbath. I want to carry on some thoughts from our last presentation in Florida. You remember that we were looking at Christ object lessons. We have a small group here, so I'm going to perhaps ask them some questions, but I won't receive comments online. So for those who are here, why were we looking at Christ object lessons? Why did we go there? Anybody?
Compare.
So someone said compare and governments.
A.T. Jones.
Go ahead, Carol.
A.T. Jones article. I think that.
So we looked at the article or the sermon from A.T. Jones from the Advent Review and Sabbath Herald. But I still need a bit more detail why we went to Christ object lessons. Tyler.
To find I forget if it was a first or second witness to compare the movement, I believe.
So Tyler said we went to Christ object lessons as a second witness to
make a comparison of the movement. I believe it was to radical feminism.
to try to understand a subject that we've been addressing for a long time now. Which is what radical feminism is. Alyssa?
Same thing, better define radical feminism.
So Alyssa said she agreed with Tyler's explanation. It was to better understand and to quantify radical feminism. As we continue down this path, if you haven't already realized it, we're going to get to a place or a conclusion that our definition of radical feminism is what? I'm not asking for the definition, some concept about it, some observation about it. So I've got on the digital whiteboard, our definition of radical feminism is I'm not asking for a definition. Bob?
Doesn't compare to anything on this earth.
So Bob says it doesn't compare to anything on this earth. Anyone else? Okay, so we're going to go with that definition or that idea, that concept. So our definition of radical feminism is not the same as the world's definition. And this is going to cause people problems. I think it already is and already has. We began our journey in inspiration, as you all know. We got into some problems, if I can express it that way. So to try to rectify or get out of that problem, what did Elder Tess do? Any thoughts? Okay, forget that question. Go back to my original thought. We began in inspiration, and I said there were some problems. So what's the problem? What's the problem if you just confine yourself to inspiration? Bob? Yes, Jack?
Are some pieces of inspiration dispensational?
So when you read inspiration, you have to be really careful to contextualize it correctly. Because some of it's dispensational. In fact, if you take the concept of line upon line, you'll see that everything is dispensational. Plus, everything can be recycled. So that's not actually a problem. It's actually a blessing. Tyler.
There's, in the Bible and Spirit of Prophecy, there's no example of radical feminism. There's no, it's all very patriarchal.
So when we looked at inspiration, all the stories, the perspective of inspiration is patriarchal. I'll use the word seem or appears, and you can decide for yourself if you want to change the word appears to actually is, or you feel comfortable with appears. So if you go to inspiration, that's Bible or Spirit of Prophecy, it appears patriarchal. And therefore it appears wrong, and therefore it appears sinful. And if we're going to be students of prophecy, what can you not do? You can't go to dreams and visions. You cannot go to either yourself or another individual's experience and say that they are being led by God. I don't think that's the definition of faith that Miller uses. I think it's much more mechanistic. And if you go down that path, you end up getting funneled or forced into a thus saith the Lord. Even if you try to explain that picture that you see, even if you try to explain it away, you're still confined to a thus saith the Lord. So the problem with inspiration is it's too limited. And it's hard to come to conclusions outside of inspiration without either damaging your faith or disobeying what God's word says. Kathy?
Is confirmation bias part of that also?
So Kathy asked about confirmation bias. So confirmation bias is going to be lurking everywhere you go. And in just a little discussion that I've just broached, you can't trust your experience because that's one of the classic problems of confirmation bias. So the problem with inspiration, if you confine yourself to those words, those documents, it's very difficult to explain or justify a new right and a new wrong. So you either reject it or you pretend that it's okay when it's not, or you try to look for some other solution. We began in inspiration, and then where did Elder Test take us? It's going to move us away from inspiration. I think we should all be clear and honest about that. Where's she going to take us? Bob?
Methodology.
To parable methodology. I would say no. She copied that from us. Or Miller. So she's using the same techniques that we've been using for 2 decades before she came.
Culture?
Kathy said culture.
Sources.
Penny said media sources. So I'm going to say that Elder Tess moves us away from inspiration and goes to the secular world. So when we talk about media, I know many of us think of the news. But I wanted to understand media as a broader concept. I'm already on public record saying we don't read enough books. We actually focus too much on opinion pieces in the news. So what did we do? She's taken us away from inspiration, away from the Bible, to now secular sources to find the truth. Any thoughts? Any comments?
First, I was thinking the four horsemen.
1 second. Alyssa?
First, I was thinking the four horsemen, but the secular sources now, like Michael Moore or AOC.
So this is giving some examples of secular sources. We could have hundreds. So I'm not trying to identify individuals, particular individuals. I just want us to see that we've moved away from the Bible and moved to secular sources. Why did we even go to inspiration? Why did you go to the Bible? What's the purpose of it?
Learn the truth.
To learn the truth. I know people are going to object, but I think it's a dangerous course to learn the truth from dreams and visions or personal experiences. You call it what you want, impressions, God's leading. It's really dangerous to go down that path to base your understanding of truth upon that foundation. So when you find that you can't get the answers from the Bible, Spirit Prophecy, you have to look somewhere else. So the test took us to the secular world to find the truth. And what did the movement say? Amen. Go ahead.
We identified those people. I don't know if this is a thought you're touching, but we identified those people as prophets.
So when we go to the world for the source of truth, Tyler said, I made the comment, or someone made the comment, that we identified those people, those sources as prophets. So you all need to have at least a vague concept of how she did that, the steps that she took. So as soon as you step down that pathway, you're going to end up, or you already have ended up, in the same ditch that you began in. So the new gurus have come along. These are positive ones, not negative ones. And now we say we get our truth from them. And I don't think we're conscious of the fact yet, but we're getting there, that we're in the same mess that we began in. And the more you look, the more you're going to see that there are problems. When you go to the world and you say, thus saith the Lord, just like you did with inspiration, you'll see the definition of an inspiration of how relationships should function is not right. And if you go to the secular world and do the same thing, I think you're going to begin to see that there are problems there too. The Bible, inspiration, is a positive document. There's no negativity about that. I'm not trying to say that at all. So when we're discussing the world or secularism, and we talk about prophets, we all need to be clear that that's all positive. There's no negativity about that. I'm not talking about bad people. I'm talking about the sources of truth that we turn to today. I think people in the movement are beginning to realize that we're being sent down a path that isn't quite correct. At the last camp meeting last week in Florida, picked up a subject that we've discussed before, which was what? What was the sort of the theme or concept of the studies that I did in Florida, the 4 presentations I did? Alyssa? So Alyssa said, compare liberal feminism with radical feminism. That's what we did in Florida. And we discussed the purpose. First, we discussed the definitions of those 3 terms. Then we discussed the goals of both camps, both groups. And the conclusion we came to was what? That they want social reform, and in order to achieve social reform, what did they both do? Alyssa said that they both work within the system. And that seemed to come as a surprise to a number of people. So I don't know if I've said this explicitly. I think I have. Drop the first word, drop the word liberal and drop the word radical. We're going to talk about social reform. We're talking about the institutions that run the world, run societies. If you take the word feminism, what cannot feminism deliver? What is it unable to deliver? What do you need to add to that in order to come to a more definitive answer? So as you're thinking about that question and the answer to it, let's go back to the one that our favorite comparison of feminism. It's what?
Black Lives Matter.
Good. Black Lives Matter. And what does it not say in that, if I call it a title, what does it not reference? I'm going to predicate that question. What does it, what does it not need to address? Because if it needed to address it, it would have done. But the architects of that concept saw fit not to go any further than they did. So what am I talking about? Alyssa said, not that issue. It's not about the white lives.
We're talking about feminism, men have to be added.
Sorry?
We're talking about feminism, men have to be added.
I'm not sure if I understand what you've just said.
So if we're not talking about white lives comparing with the black lives.
So it's not comparing black with white.
The women's lives matter as much as the men's lives.
So it's not about women comparing to men, because that's black comparing to white.
Egalitarian all-inclusiveness.
Sorry?
Egalitarian all-inclusiveness.
Alyssa said egalitarianism or all-inclusiveness. So I'll give you what my thoughts are. The question that came to my mind was this word, black. And the question I asked myself, what kind of black? Big black people, small ones, strong ones? If you start adding anything onto that, which means you refine your definition, what do you end up doing? And as I said, you get narrower.
Becomes less inclusive.
It becomes less inclusive, Tyler said. I want us to see that. Whether or not the authors of this movement realized all of this, they've done a really good job. It's not too complicated and it's not too simplistic, but it doesn't do the right job. So what kind of black lives? Answer? All black lives. So we're okay with that. So let's go back to feminism. I can't remember exactly the question that I asked about feminism. Alyssa?
What can't it deliver?
Yes. So I asked, with respect to feminism, what's the limitation when you say feminism? And the answer is? Alyssa?
It's only talking about women.
So Alyssa said it's only talking about women. No, that's not what the issue is. We've just gone to Black Lives Matter. And I've said it's not about comparing black and white. So therefore, when you say feminism, it's not saying you're only looking at women. So you can either look at it as a concept, or you can work through examples in your mind and try to think, what could feminism not deliver? Kathy? So Kathy says, feminism cannot deliver equality to all. Is that what you said? I'd like to do a vote on that, but there's not enough of us. Okay. Who disagrees with Kathy? Okay, we've got a few people. So I'm going to say half the group disagreed with Kathy. I think if you just look at the word feminism, if you look at what it stands for, you could go to a dictionary definition, you could look at a concept. I guess I want to make the bold statement that feminism delivers everything. There's nothing it cannot do. It's all powerful. When you understand what the term means, when you understand what the objective is, just calling yourself a feminist gives you everything and anything you could ever want. That's what I think. Because I've asked people, tell me about this radical feminism thing that you speak of. Because I can't see what they're doing or what they've even done ever. And the place that people almost always goes to is the suffragette movement. So when they start talking about suffrage and they read stories, they say, look how radical those women were. And we've already discussed, I think, that the definition that they're using is not right. What are they actually saying, Tyler, about those women?
They are acting out, they're very extreme in their actions.
So Tyler said, people took the word radical to mean extreme or crazy. He didn't use the word crazy, I did. And because they did wild things, they must have been radicals. Or if you don't want to be that controversial, you'll say the following. They changed the world upside down. And they made such huge changes to society. Seems to meet the bar or the criteria of being radical. And before I give my rebuttal, you give your rebuttal to that position. Tell me what they're not seeing or the mistake that they're making. They being the members.
Are you saying in the accusation of extremism or?
So I'll read you my question. I asked about feminism. Then I asked, well, what is radical feminism? And people say, oh, a good example is the suffragette movement, suffrage. Look how radical they were in their behavior. Look at the huge changes that they effected. If that's not radical, I don't know what is. That's what they would argue. And my question is, what's the rebuttal to that? Alyssa?
It might seem radical from the perspective of male privilege.
It may appear to be radical to us because they're tackling male privilege.
It's not really that radical to want equal rights.
But Alyssa said it's not radical to want equal rights. And you're using the term radical in what context? Yes. It's really hard not to fall into the trap of saying radical means extreme. Tyler.
Trying to use the correct definition of extreme. It wasn't radical. I may forget extreme, but it wasn't radical because it never was able to solve the root issue of patriarchy. It was only trying to patchwork it.
So Tyler said it wasn't radical because it never went to the root of patriarchy. Yeah. It was like putting a temporary patch on the system. So if we went back to last week's study and looked at the definition of liberal, the terms or the condition by which that movement operates, its goals, its objectives, I hope if we're not all certain now, we're at least more comfortable that movement wasn't radical, but that it was liberal. And doing extreme things, dangerous things, to get social reform or liberal change doesn't turn it from liberalism into radicalism. So I'm suggesting all the social reform that we have had in the world, period, can all be explained by the word or the term feminism. You don't need to add anything else onto that. It delivers on everything. if you think of education, health, and work in the context of being under the law or a legal framework, feminism delivers on everything. And that's the conclusion I hope that we came to last week. Tyler?
So you're saying we don't need to differentiate, we don't need to add the qualifier, liberal or radical to see that all of social reform or all that we're talking about has been achieved? Is that what you mean? Or can be achieved?
Can I just clarify, can the translators hear Tyler? Okay, so I'm not going to repeat what he said. You go ahead and translate. So the answer to that question is yes. This word that we put in front of it, liberal or radical, is redundant. If we were to go back to what we did last week, when we start talking about how radicals work, on day one, what was the general consensus about radical? Alyssa said, can you hear Alyssa? Okay, so she's a bit further away. So Alyssa said, we'll conceptualize radical as working outside of the system, against the system. And why would you come to that conclusion? What forces you to come to that conclusion? Because it's logical. What forces you down that path? I'm radical, therefore I have to work outside of the system. Why is that? I'm going to say logically correct. It borders on saying correct. Because I think this is the reason that we were stuck there. We know it's wrong, by the way. We found that out by class 3 or 4. But why did it seem right? Alyssa?
We see patriarchy as the system, so we have to work outside of that.
We see patriarchy as well?
Outside or as the system, so we have to work outside of that.
So if you take the definition for radical as root, which is the proper definition, and if the system is patriarchy, and you want to get to the root of it, that means two things. You have to get to the root in understanding, and you have to get to the root to fixing. The king won't give up their power. So you have to take the kingdom by violence. And we would define violence how?
Extra legal, illegal.
Illegal. outside of the system. So I want us to see that's the logical steps of how we began at class 1, everybody saying outside of the system. By the time we get to the end, what do we realize? And this said we can't do that.
We don't even need to do that.
Tyler said we don't need to do that. Bob?
Would vindicate Satan if we work outside the system and do illegal stuff.
So Bob says that it would then vindicate Satan's arguments. If you work out of the system, he would end up winning. So all of those answers are correct. But what I want us to remember, when I was, I guess, pushing through those classes and cajoling people, in order to say that you work within the system, what would it mean about you? You claim to be radical, but you're what? You're liberal? Yeah, let's get to the good words. And Lisa said hypocrite. Penny? That big F word. Fake. Good. We're all fake radicals. Oh, I know, because we're all Laodicean, that's why. So we try to explain our fakeness with this Laodicean model. So borrowing from a Bible verse, we turn the truth, in parentheses of God, into a lie. We then believe lies about ourselves. And when the human mind begins to believe things that are wrong about itself or uncomfortable, what do you end up doing? You end up trying to fix the problem. That's how the human brain functions. It doesn't like having a disassociation. Cognitive dissonance, I think is the term. So then we have to persuade ourselves that we're what kind of people? Sinful, bad, wicked, Laodicean, all negative connotations about ourselves. By the time we got to the end of last week, I hope all of that got erased from our psyche, from our consciousness. And so when there was an instruction a few years ago that said it's our religious duty to vote, within the system, very liberal, very compromising. Most people didn't think about all those other bits. They just said, yeah, we're going to do that now. Because we're radical, we're going to get to the root of the problem and we're going to vote ourselves out of the mess. Then we realize whoever the leaders are, however good their parties are, it's all the system. There's nothing radical about anything there. So then we have to try to reevaluate what it means to be radical. And so then we began to look at Christ object lessons. Chapter 5, beginning page 76 in the English. Tyler?
So if we don't need to make the differentiation between liberal and radical, but we are,
1 second. Go ahead.
but we're critical of the work thus far in feminism, saying that it hasn't hit the root yet. Should we be critical of feminism then, or the root has never been reached, I guess? And do you actually still need a differentiation?
Just the last bit again.
Do you still need a differentiation to identify that feminism hasn't gone far enough?
So Tyler has summarized where we've got to, the problem that we're now in, the conceptual problem that confronts us. Do we have to go and undo what we've been taught? Where did this idea of being a radical feminist come from in the context of this movement? Who invents that term for us? Lisa? So Elder Tess, whatever angel you want to make her, we know that she delivers the midnight cry message. So the messenger of the Lord stands up and says something about who we are and what we should be. And it's not some minor point. It's not like some definition from Acts 27 of the name of some town. This is the cornerstone or the foundation of the whole Midnight Cry message. And what was the problem? That she could not avoid. That she could not avoid. That we ended up getting into. We've already discussed it. Just to recap. Bob?
We can't work. That we can't work with or completely without patriarchy.
So Bob said that we can't work with or without patriarchy.
Yeah.
Alyssa?
She had to go outside of inspiration.
So Alyssa said she had to go outside of inspiration. So the prophets that we had, the old prophets, didn't seem fit for purpose. So she offers us a new set of prophets. And now what's the problem? It's the same problem. They are not fit for purpose either. And so you have to ask yourself the question that Tyler asked. It was several layers of questions. So the first question, was the Midnight Cry messenger right or wrong in the cornerstone of their message? So you might say, well, I've got faith, but you need some evidence. Did she offer you as an individual enough evidence to say the old prophets are not sufficient? You need to go to the new prophet to understand the truth. Or to put it in a more succinct fashion, we're going to borrow a term from the world, radical feminism, and we're going to say that's what you need to be. You have to answer for yourself if you believe she was correct. Because if she's wrong, everything's good. You don't have any problems. But if she's correct, now you've got a lot of problems. Because the evidence is beginning to mount. As the days and weeks move on, that we're not as radical as we thought we were. And radicalism doesn't even work. So I've said explicitly now that feminism delivers everything. Just the word. So if you were to use either the mathematical concept of a Venn diagram, that's VENN, I think we're all vaguely familiar with that mathematical model. We just call it compare and contrast, perhaps. It's a looser definition of that. What's the maximum you can have percentage-wise? 100%. If you start dividing things out, you just get ratios which always add up to 100. Where am I going with this? what have I just said? I think is a fact. I keep up my Portuguese interpreter keeps cutting out. Is that me or is that them? So we've got a problem. What's the problem? Where do we start? What have I said? This is a starting point. Alyssa?
Well,
Percentages. We're talking percentages, remember?
right, and then you said, so what does that imply essentially? And
No. Let's go back. Let's start with a premise, a thesis.
that's the covers all.
Alyssa said, feminism delivers what? Feminism delivers 100%. Can you have more than 100%? So if feminism delivers 100%, your next question would be, Tyler?
Are you going with like Black Lives Matter? Is that, or are you going
That-
with radical versus
Let's go with radical.
radical?
How much?
I mean, it's
Ask the
redundant.
question.
It's redundant.
Ask the question. How much?
How much does radical feminism deliver? Does radical deliver?
So we just stick with percentages. I'll get some more questions, then we'll tie it up. Bob?
Radical feminism, where we talked about it, can't deliver.
So let's ask the question, not the answer.
Why can't it deliver?
So Bob says, why can't they deliver? That's the second question that we'd have to ask.
Does liberal feminism deliver?
So if feminism delivers 100%, how much does radical feminism deliver? And the answer is 0. So radical feminism doesn't do anything. So if we're going to start by saying the Midnight Cry messenger, Elder Tess, could not be wrong on the foundation of her message, which means radical is real, it's a genuine thing. You have to start there, answer one way or the other. If your answer is yes, radical is real, and we're supposed to be that thing, then you find out actually feminism does everything and radical does nothing. Then you have to try to find what is all this radical stuff about. Where are you going to go to find out?
Can't go to inspiration.
So it says we can't go to inspiration.
Can't go to the world, I guess, because the world has given us a broken definition. Got to go to the movement.
So now we're going to have to go to the movement to try to understand. That's what Tyler said. I want to state that I don't have a definitive answer to this. But I want us to see that despite everything that you've been told, everything, not directly by older texts, but everything you've been told or believed isn't quite correct. A secular model of, we'll call it, of radicalness won't give you all the answers that you need. And if it doesn't give you the truth, it will turn the truth into a lie. So therefore, this movement is going to have to create its own definition of radicalness. We'll call it that. We're going to call it radical feminism, of radicalness. So what are the sources that you can go to? Bob says God. So we could start with God, but that's not so user-friendly. We need the mediator between God and us. That's not Jesus.
Be the Bible, inspiration.
So we're back to inspiration and the world. So now we have to go back and reevaluate anything and everything that you've read to find out the truth of what it means to be radical. When you get to this stage in a thesis, in a study, that if you're doing it by yourself or in a group that you're walking through, to me, this is the most dangerous phase in the study. Because in order to launch out into unknown territory, which is where we're headed, and if you believe the beginning of your journey, the foundation was true, Elder Test was correct. So now we're beginning to see that there are problems between what she said and what we have discovered. So before you venture too far forward, you need to pause and reevaluate everything that you've studied to make sure you're correct. And this is where Miller found himself. I can't remember, what was it, like was it a decade? When he found the truth, was it 18, I think? Is it 18? So we'll talk about, someone said about 13 to 18 to when he actually begins to preach in the 1830s, I think it is. So what I want us to see is, the children's Adventist version of that history isn't correct. It's not because he's scared. That's the story we want to give. What he's doing is he's already realized there's a problem between his conclusions and the prophet's statement. And now he's going to spend over a decade rechecking his work. And that's the dangerous phase. It's not the preaching bit afterwards. So I want to counsel everybody, when you see apparent problems in a statement or a message of a prophet, and depending on how you count, we've got various prophets that we're talking about now. You have Elder Jeff, which I really do counsel people not to throw him away too quickly and to not take his studies too lightly. You have Elder Tess, and you've got all those prophets in the world. And they're all offering you their perspective. And when I said that Elder Tess is correct, you have to ask yourself the question, was Elder Jeff wrong? Are the prophets in the world wrong? And if they're not false prophets, and I don't think any of those three groups are, takes you back to studies that we've done years ago. Can't remember the chapter to hand, but it's in the Great Controversy, where Ellen White discusses that prophets are limited. They're limited by the dispensation in which they live. They're limited by the way that they were brought up, or how they, I say this another way, how they engage with society. They have their own human biases. And so you can see that it's not that straightforward to say we have true prophets and false prophets. I think in the movement, sometimes people use the term sifting. You go to the true, maybe you'd say the left, and you have to work out every statement that they say, whether it's true or not true. And the difficulty that you face is when you find something is not correct or not true. Because then you have to demonstrate why or explain why it's not right. So I want to summarize. We've been discussing the subject of radical feminism. What does it mean to be radical? In order to do that, we compare. It seems to me that when you compare it to mainstream feminism, which is the liberal feminism, there's no difference. Feminism does everything for you. The term radical is redundant. Elder Tess says it's important to identify as a radical. On your behalf, I'm saying, I don't even know what a radical is. There's no evidence that they do anything. So then we have to go back and try to understand what it means to be radical. And it's not a secret. I've suggested going to Christ object lessons as a means to trying to answer that question. Let's close with prayer. Holy God, I want to thank you for the journey that you have taken me on. It's always a blessing when we can come together and be traveling companions. When we can do that, we can have fellowship with each other. We can have companionship. And not only are those social relationships that you have given to us nice, but you are beginning to show us that they're one of the tools to re-educate us. Help us to walk carefully so we don't make shipwreck of our faith. Thank you for all that you have done for me and you continue to do for this movement. In Jesus' name. Amen.